to do a few introductions as people keep trickling in. We have a lot of people who said they're going to kind of just come check in, and we may let them know that at 7:30 the panel was going to start. Taylor, you want to just shoot Katie a quick email or call just to check in on her?
Yeah.
Thanks. So first off, thank you guys so much for being here and for coming. And I will probably do this a couple of times, and we might do intros a couple of times, but this seriously would not have been possible without my team. And we are missing one person whose father had some surgery yesterday, who was Lily, but Taylor Padower, who is up there, and Jess Harris and Emory Pill, this would not have happened without them. They're my phenomenal associates and a part of J. Lewis Therapy, and literally things wouldn't run without them. They are incredible. And I just want to acknowledge that. I also appreciate that we transitioned to virtual because yours truly got COVID, and their ability to pivot and make it happen, because a lot of these things are not my strength. And I just am eternally grateful that they show up in the ways that they do. And I am so appreciative of it. So thank you so much. Next time you're in the office, there's a little something in your box. I just have to be able to go to the office, which I can't do right now. So starting with that, and then I want to actually we're probably going to do intros twice. We'll do it now, and then I think we're going to do it again at 7:30 when I think more people are going to trickle in. So Hannah, could I start with you?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Yes, I hope you feel better from COVID. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm Hannah. I use she, her pronouns. I am a labor and delivery and abortion nurse. So I work in labor and delivery at Piedmont, Atlanta, and I work part-time as an abortion nurse at the Atlanta Comprehensive Wellness Clinic. Want me to say anything else, or?
Is there anything you want people to know just off the bat, or anything about you, or anything?
I'm from Memphis. I think I really strongly identify as a Southerner because I think that it's important that we, like abortion rights in the South specifically are really important. And I went to Agnes Scott which is why I'm in Atlanta, and did women's gender and sexuality studies there. And that's important to me too.
Awesome. Awesome. We're so glad you were here. Thank you for making the time. And excuse me, Drew, I'll pop over to you.
Hello, my name is Drew Thrasher. I use they and them pronouns. I am a therapist over at Modern Path, which is in Chamblee. I prioritize working with clients who hold marginalized identities, especially those that are related to gender and sexuality. I also identify very strongly with being a Southerner. I grew up in a really rural Georgia town, and I'm really glad to be here.
Thanks, Drew. So glad you're here. And Shlomo.
I do not identify as a Southerner. Yeah, hold on, sorry.
So you might have to leave the room.
Cool.
Okay, we'll take two.
Awesome. Okay. My name is Shlomo Pill. I am a senior lecturer at Emory Law School, where I teach constitutional law, civil rights law, religious liberty, and a bunch of other sundry topics. And I'm here because Civi asked me, and I'm always happy to try and help out and give some legal context to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. And Katie joined us. Katie, if you don't mind, I just had everyone kind of adjust their name at the bottom of who you are, pronouns or anything you want us to know. But we did some brief intros. I was like, we'll probably do it again, but if anything you want to introduce, let everyone know about you. You're also on mute. Can we unmute her? Okay, great. Thanks.
Sure. Let me add my name and pronouns real quick. Sorry, I forgot my computer, so I had to get a computer to join today.
We are so glad you're here.
I'm Katie Lakem. My pronouns are she, her. I am a gender specialist in Atlanta, Decatur. I work mostly with the trans and non-binary community. I do start with ages 12, like 11, 12 and up. So I work with teens as well. I also wanted to talk about, I think another part of the background that I can bring tonight is that I was raised conservative religious in a conservative religious background. I am no longer in that background, but I think that that's one of the aspects that I can bring tonight.
Amazing. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. Again, people are trickling in, so I'm actually going to kind of pivot a little bit. And if there's any specific questions, I actually have a question that I'm going to throw out there, because I do know a handful of clients have asked this recently before we jump into the panel. And I do feel like possibly Katie and Drew could probably answer this, but I've had some clients ask about PFLAG groups specifically focused on with transgender children. And so I don't know if you could offer and let us know, we can even put it in the chat, of some groups that are really supportive, anything that could be helpful. So you can, I'd love for you to actually share them and then also put them in the chat if you have any groups that could be helpful for parents.
I'm gonna a group that I think is really helpful is actually called, it's not PFLAG, it's called Transparent Atlanta. And it's called as its name, it's as it's spelled, Transparent Atlanta. It's headed by a gentleman named Peter, who has a trans child himself. And it meets at, I think it's St. Luke's, it's on Ponce. It meets at a church on Ponce. And it's just a very informative group. I've been a speaker there before, and the parents range from children ages 5 to 18. So I think with PFLAG, you get a lot of parents of teenagers, but this group specifically has parents of littles.
Lovely. And is there a cost or is it free?
It's free.
Awesome. It's at a church, any religious base to it, or it just happens to be?
Not at all. Not at all. Just happens to be there.
Okay. Hannah, you just threw something out there. So you put it up there. Thank you. And will you jump in and share what you said?
I just shared, I haven't been to this, so I don't know what it's personally like, but I know I've seen Karis Books, which has now moved to the Agnes Scott campus, has a gender expansive parenting collective. I'm not sure if they're meeting right now, but they're meeting over Zoom for a while.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm sorry to not include you in that group. My apologies. And Drew, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, I'd love to add kind of on the other end of things, support for the kiddos.
Great.
So at Modern Path, actually, we will be having a group that's starting very soon once we get our group members together that is specifically for queer and trans kiddos. I believe the age range starts at 12 years old and caps at 17. And I will put my email in the chat, and if anyone is interested in that, I'm happy to provide more information.
It'll be amazing. I know just some of the people here so far would find that really helpful. So thank you for that. Any other kind of maybe general questions? And we can start the panel early. I'm not opposed to that. Any other general questions that people have, curiosities that we can kind of just throw out there in this moment? And if you're feeling a little shy, because there's a lot of people, you can certainly type it, or you can message Taylor privately and she'll help us out. So I'm gonna pivot, since we're flexible and this is how things are gonna happen. We're just gonna go ahead and get started. If we were gonna kind of jump right in at 7:30, I wanted to really go big because of, I'm not sure who heard yesterday about the new 6-week abortion ban and personhood provision. I'm not going to go there quite yet. I'm gonna let us ease in a little bit because I could feel my fire kind of building around it. But I guess in the moment, I just wanted to throw out, and again, I'm going to ask panelists specifically, but if anyone wants to jump in, you can raise your hand on the screen, or if you need to message Taylor or pop it into the chat. Any of it is flexible. I guess I really wanted to go therapeutically for just a moment, right? And maybe this might lead to Katie or Drew. Our clients come in, they're feeling very helpless. They're feeling hopeless. You know, parents, those going through fertility, trauma situations. How do we tolerate and help clients hold this, given the legalities to things and also true feelings? So let's do feelings first, because everyone knows that's my favorite. So let's start there and then we'll build upon it.
I guess I'll start because this has been going on all week with me, and well, since the last month. Is I try not to sugarcoat anything with my clients. So I don't have the greatest vocabulary that I use with my clients. So I'm pretty obvious. I'm pretty just adamant. Like I'm here with you. I get you. With my trans clients, obviously, I'm like, you know, I'm not part of your community, but I understand. I'm hearing it every day. But it sucks. Like I can't take this back from you. I can't like reframe this in a better way. Like, you know, normally as a therapist, we'd like reframe things and say it's going to be better. It's not going to be as bad as you think, but I try to be pretty real with them.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, I agree with that. It is extremely difficult when we're confronted with an issue that is something completely out of our control and our client's control. Something that I've been thinking about a lot is starting our work outside of session. I've been focusing a lot of my energy on taking care of myself and making sure that I'm able to show up, since, you know, we are human beings as well. And if we're not taking care of ourselves in the ways that we need to, we're not going to be able to show up for our clients as best we can. And the primary things I've been thinking about is, you know, like Katie said, there's not a whole lot of sugarcoating to be done here. There are education and resources that we can share. If you are feeling like you're lacking in the education and resources department, reach out to folks who may have some resources. I have a few that I'd be happy to share at some point today. Yeah, but looking for ways that we can still empower our clients when they are in a helpless situation.
Yeah. I just have to take a second, because I think the thing that you just said, and I know Hannah also probably has some great resources, and I kind of jumped in and didn't even really introduce myself or what we do. And Taylor as well is going to put the donate in there's a link to donate. Thanks. Hannah had recommended Women's Feminist Health, their reproductive rights activist organization right here in Atlanta. And we are there's a link to donate. So no need to do it at this minute, but it's nothing like through us. It's just, we wanted you to have the information. And I think right now more than ever, our local organizations definitely need extra funds to support them and to rally and make sure that we are taking care of those that really will need our support. And I think that's something that really Drew just led on to, is we do have many therapists in the room and many parents in the room, and honestly people in general, and we need to make sure we take care of ourselves. I think in order to show up for clients, in order to show up for our children, in order to show up for partners, right, ourselves, we have to make sure that we're grounded and we can hold conviction in how we're going to show up. And slightly to that flip side, if we have someone come in who might have a differing opinion, right? How to also tolerate and hold that. And I imagine most of us tend to land and see clients similar to our personal values and whatnot. That just kind of happens in the therapeutic world, but being attuned to that can be pretty activating if someone came in with a differing opinion. So having said that, I'm going to transition, but I really didn't even introduce myself. So I'm going to backtrack. A little bit of COVID brain here. My name is Jill Lewis. I own J. Lewis Therapy. We're a group therapy practice in Sandy Springs, as well as in New York City, totally virtual in New York, but I did spend 14 years there. And so myself and Civi are licensed there, and Taylor will be sooner than later, I think, maybe. We do specialize in eating disorders and perinatal mental health. We see 12 and up, but I would really say closer to 14. And we do a lot of groups. So we are a group practice. We also do a lot of groups. And I'm just going to share them. We do 2 eating disorder groups. We do 2 groups for those living in larger bodies. We have a 40+ interpersonal process group. We are starting a Black women's support safe space group. And if there's and we're starting an ARFID support group, which will hopefully start next month. And it's going to go every other week with Lily. So very passionate about group work, which is why I find this so valuable, is how we can interact and share with each other. There's some great things that happen in individual, but group therapy is where we can really see dynamics pop out. Any questions at the moment, or I'm going to keep jumping in? Any thoughts, feelings, anything anyone wants to share?
I do. You said, did you say ARFID group?
Uh-huh.
Can you, just in case anybody doesn't know what that is?
Thank you. So ARFID is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. It is an eating disorder. It is, however, it's different. There's less of a there's very little preoccupation with the body. It's basically created around rules and rituals on how to eat food, fears of food, taste, textures, etc. It's very behavioral. We work slightly from a different perspective when it comes to that. It's a lot of collaborating with a dietitian. And a lot of times those struggling with ARFID feel a little excluded from the eating disorder community because the way that they think about food is very different than someone struggling with the eating disorder who tends to land a little more body focused. So we want to make sure that they do also have a supportive place to explore and to check in. And there's a lot of anxieties of going out to eat and showing up with friends. And so we really want to make sure we tap into that. And thank you for that, Katie. Okay, so now that we're transitioning on, I'm going to keep moving on, and we're gonna go into it. So whoever wants to answer this can. Where do we as Georgia stand right now on abortion? I kind of started it earlier, but any of our panelists, where do we land?
Well, I didn't realize this until yesterday. I mean, until today, because I've been sick all week. Mm-hmm. And I read the Washington Post article today, which literally like made me hurt. And because it's the heartbeat bill it's not technically, I think there's an attorney on this call. It's not technically a trigger. It's not technically a trigger, but it was put into place apparently yesterday.
Yeah.
I'll
let Shlomo, you want to jump in and give us sort of maybe the
Sure.
information. Thanks, Katie.
Sure. So Georgia passed this heartbeat bill, as it's commonly known, back in 2019, passed by the Georgia legislature, signed by the governor. It technically went into effect on January 1st of 2020. But as was expected at the time, a federal court in Georgia immediately prohibited the government, Georgia, from enforcing that law. It issued an injunction preventing the government from enforcing that law because at the time, of course, the law was blatantly violated the right to abortion protected under the 14th Amendment, as explained in Roe versus Wade, et cetera, all the kind of good stuff we're familiar with that changed dramatically a month ago. So the state of Georgia appealed that decision to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, a federal appellate court, which is based here in Georgia. And that appeal kind of was argued in early fall, in September of 2021. So right at the same time as the Supreme Court had the Dobbs case, which was recently decided, on its docket. And what the 11th Circuit said was, we're not going to decide this case now. We're going to hang on to it because whatever the Supreme Court does in the Dobbs case is going to have a major effect on what we do with this Georgia heartbeat bill challenge. And so the 11th Circuit put it on hold. Immediately after the Dobbs decision came out on June 24th, overturning Roe versus Wade, upending the fundamental constitutional right to obtain an abortion, the appellate court, the 11th Circuit Appellate Court, gave all the parties in that case, Planned Parenthood and the other parties in that case, as well as the state of Georgia, 21 days to kind of tell the court what effect they think that decision should have on that case, after which the 11th Circuit was going to issue its opinion. That opinion, of course, came out yesterday. I'll just note that both for the Dobbs opinion by the Supreme Court and the 11th Circuit opinion that came out yesterday, they only came across my radar because Civi told me that they had come out, and I was not in tune. I did not expect either of them to come out when they did. I just got a text and said they decided. I'm like, oh, now I have to find it and read it and figure it out. So that opinion came out yesterday, and basically what the appellate court said was the injunction that was issued by a lower court preventing Georgia from enforcing the heartbeat bill is now gone. The appellate court overturned that injunction, and now the heartbeat bill is effectively enforced as of yesterday when the appellate court decision came out. So that's where we stand. What the heartbeat bill actually does and what effect it has and how it actually functions is kind of a little bit of a black hole, which is part of what's very confusing about all of this.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of continue because I felt like, you know, I like all of the legal stuff of all of this is really confusing, and I'm thankful to have somebody kind of explain what's been going on, honestly, because I know what we're allowed to do like in practice. But following like the injunctions and all of that it's distressing sometimes. I don't think so. You know, I work both in a hospital and in a clinic, and with every kind of change that there has been in the last 2 months or so, like the local clinics, the abortion clinics that are in Atlanta and in Georgia and in the South have been strategizing, trying to respond to what's happening, and having to change things really last minute. So I'm supposed to go into clinic tomorrow. We're still going into clinic, but now it's my understanding, and again, like this changed yesterday, so it's kind of, excuse my language, but it's going to be a bit of a shit show for most clinics to figure out how. It has been a bit of it's been a shit show for years with the like laws that have been passed. And, you know, when we tried to pass this in 2019 and when the Georgia tried to pass it and all that. I know that in Memphis, because Tennessee had their heartbeat bill pass, and they're right now you can't get an abortion past 6 weeks in Tennessee. We have to do ultrasounds on patients before they get an abortion, and if there's cardiac activity, they cannot have a procedure with the heartbeat bill in place, which is obviously devastating. And then those patients who may have already traveled a long way to get to our clinic or to get to, you know, with every restriction that is passed, more clinics have closed. It's been harder to get an abortion. And so, I mean, the other day because right for the last like month, state by state, it's fallen, and Georgia has now been one of the only southern states that could still do procedures. We could do them, I think, up to 21 weeks here. So in the last month, we've had I had a patient who's from Memphis who came to us, had gone to Alabama, but the day that her procedure was supposed to be in Alabama was the day that the ban passed, so she couldn't get in Alabama and had to come all the way to Georgia. And so it's right now, I think tomorrow we can still do medication abortions, we can still do surgicals as long as there's no cardiac activity, which would be happening around 6 weeks. It can kind of depend, but if there's cardiac activity, then we can't do a procedure legally. Which, I mean, just frankly sucks, like, just to be real, like you were saying, Katie. I mean, there's no sugarcoating it. I mean, it's a really terrible situation, and a lot of people are going to, I mean, there are probably people who, because these, you know, the decision gets made, and then people who had appointments 2 days from now have to figure out something else. And there's just more and more roadblocks with every step of the way.
Thank you for that, Hannah and Shlomo. Again, my pausing is kind of just taking it in. and holding so much sadness and so much anger that I think everyone is also holding, along with congestion. But I just think that, so to follow up, there's two parts that I want to continue with this right now. The first, and I know, Shlomo, this was a question that I believe you're getting, and Hannah and Drew or Katie, you can speak to this possibly. So would Hannah go to jail, or what would happen hypothetically if, you know, there was an abortion, or is that truly literally not happening? And I'm asking, I really want to know, like, will people be thrown in jail? And I think people are very terrified of this. And so I guess I really want to know, like, what will happen?
So it's hard to say if Hannah ends up in jail. There are so many things that have to happen along the way before that could actually happen. But could Hannah get thrown in jail? Yes. Currently, as a result of the change to the abortion law in Georgia, someone who performs an illegal abortion faces between 1 and 10 years in prison. Now, and that clearly applies to medical practitioners. It could, in theory, apply to self-induced abortions as well, although, you know, so given all the steps that have to happen in order for that to actually turn into I'm going to jail, is the procedure has to happen, right? There has to be some mechanism by which it gets reported. A prosecutor has to decide to actually pursue the case as opposed to not pursue the case. And we've been seeing throughout in many states where, particularly in urban areas, in many states that have put abortion bans in place, we've seen district attorneys and prosecutors sort of saying, we're going to use our prosecutorial discretion to never prosecute these cases. It has to go through trial. There has to be adequate evidence to establish guilt. A jury has to actually convict you for it. Again, all 12 members of the jury have to actually convict you for it, and then yeah, you could be going to jail. So not to diminish the fact that long before you end up in jail, that entire process has ruined your life. But if the question is kind of, can you end up in jail? The answer is yes, in theory. Part of the problem here is, or part of the, you know, the reason why it's hard to answer these questions is because, you know, it hasn't been done. Like this law went into effect yesterday. We don't know what prosecutions under this statute look like. We don't know how they play out in court. I think prosecutors don't know how they play out in court. How do you try these cases? How do you argue them to a jury? How do you get convictions? What do the appeals look like? Like all of that stuff is still out there. This is not uncommon when you have brand new laws that have never been tested and never been passed and literally have been completely off the books for the last 50 years, right? So we don't really know what this looks like practically, but is it a theoretical possibility? It is, and you know, depending on where in the state you are, it could be a very real possibility.
She jumped in.
I just really wanted to add.
Sorry, my screen moved.
Sorry, I just really wanted to add, if I know you mentioned that you go through all that stuff and at the very end you may end up in jail. I just wanted to add that if you, because we know that people get arrested and can't post bail or bond, they can't afford to, and so they're stuck. I just wanted to point that out because of disadvantaged people.
Yeah.
And also, like, I mean, obviously jail is one terrible consequence, but like, you know, like he said, like before that, I mean, you lose your license, certainly. I mean, to practice medicine or to practice nursing, you know, all of these things are, there's a lot of accrediting, you know, in both the world of medicine and healthcare and law that are ways that your life can be harmed. You can be financially hurt. You could, you know, up and into, you know, the dire consequence of going to jail.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think one of the reasons I really wanted to do this, and we as our team, is I do, listen, I just catastrophized. I said, listen, man, you're going to go to jail, right? And so I think something that Shlomo did and Hannah, which was really helpful, and I think people really need to hear is first off, there's many steps before that. There's also different consequences that don't just equate to, hey, let's go to jail. But I do think those are questions that are being asked. So I think it's important. But one of the goals, and we're going to get to this in a little bit, is again, then what are the options and what do people do? So we're going to get there in just a second. But I do think that's an important piece, is to help clients, family members, anyone who's struggling, is to not catastrophize, and let's get concrete, grounded information. And I'm guilty of that too. I mean, my mind races and expands because of so much concern. The ball project. Awesome. Oh, thank you.
We do have 2 questions now that people have raised hands. So I feel like in the spirit of kind of how this is going so far, we do have 2 people wanting to ask. So first will be Hannah Paul, and you can go ahead and ask the panel your question on this topic.
Hey, thank you. It's very funny sharing a name with the other Hannah and talking about me going to jail. But my question is it illegal for a resident of Georgia to have an abortion somewhere else, or is it just when you're in the state?
Good question.
Not entirely clear. The statute, the heartbeat bill, unlike the bills that have been passed by some other states that have that actually go after that explicitly, the Georgia bill doesn't. So it's hard to know for sure. You could imagine, right? So kind of, going back to what Jill said about catastrophizing, like the number of discretionary decisions that get made throughout the legal process are huge. So yeah, you could imagine kind of excuse the inelegant phrasing, but a wacko prosecutor saying, I'm going after this person, even though it's not clear that the law covers people who receive an abortion. It covers those who perform the abortion. All right, so if Hannah went to a different state where it was legal, performed an abortion, and then came back to the state of Georgia, and was a resident of the state of Georgia that whole time, you could imagine a really zealous prosecutor for trying to make their kind of political name or something like that going after Hannah. But it's hard to imagine a scenario where that really is real, because that's almost certainly a losing case. There are so many legal hurdles for that prosecutor to jump through, and so many challenges that can be made to kind of enforcing a statute that way, constitutional challenges and other kinds of challenges, that it's hard to imagine realistically that would happen. Nevertheless, the risk is the risk might be low, but the consequences are very high. So Hannah doesn't do it, presumably, unless Hannah wants to be a hero, but she's taking a risk, right? This is kind of why we're seeing, even in many places where prosecutors have said, we are not going to prosecute these cases, there are no abortions happening. Clinics have closed and there are no abortions happening because the risk is just too great. Even if you're not going to prosecute me, or you say you're not going to prosecute me, well, what if some other prosecutor in some other jurisdiction within the state comes after me and they can find a way to do it, et cetera, et cetera? The consequences are just really high. So, the risk might be low, but if someone decides to be an ass, they could make life pretty difficult.
Thanks, Shlomo.
All right, the next person we have asking a question is Madeline.
Hello, and thank you, Jill, for organizing this. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Mine is more of a legal question. This came up on one of the mental health listservs that I belong to, which was given, and it may vary state to state, but is there any obligation as a mental health provider under duty to warn that if I know that a client talks to me about possibly having an abortion or intends to have an abortion, that given how the law changed, I'm violating duty to warn by not doing something to stop them?
Great question, Madeline.
So not super familiar with mental health law. So I'm not sure exactly what duty to warn would consist of on a state-to-state basis. It almost certainly differs from state to state. I would imagine just applying kind of a legal professional ethics standard of, if someone tells me they're going to commit a crime, what are my obligations? In Georgia, at least, this probably wouldn't rate. It's not at all clear that someone who receives an abortion has violated the law. Actually, it's very clear that if a pregnant person goes and gets an abortion, they have not committed a crime. The person that performed the abortion has committed a crime. If they perform an abortion on themselves, if they get appropriate medication, they take it at home, et cetera, maybe they've committed a crime, but it's not at all clear that even then they would have. So I doubt that there's enough there in terms of certainty that a crime is about to be committed that would require any action. But that's very imprecise advice because I'm not sure.
I can try to say a similar question that's more specific. So in every state, but certainly Georgia law, where mental health providers are mandatory reporters of child abuse, that we're obligated to report that. So if, and I guess I would say, like, if you considered a fetus a living being with rights and somebody was doing something to that, would we then be obligated, or we knew that that had happened, are we obligated to report?
So Shlomo, sorry, I'm going to interrupt just for one sec. Paige and Hannah had just dropped in some stuff around sort of the mental health piece. So maybe can I tap into them as Hannah Paul? Paige, if you don't mind sharing, I can't quite read everything that was going through, but Paige or Katie or Hannah want to jump in and share what you had just said would be helpful.
Yeah. I was saying that from my understanding, because I'm also part of some listservs that was talking about this. From my understanding, this doesn't have to do with duty to warn. It has to do with duty to protect, like Tarasoff law, and Georgia does not have that. So it does not, from my understanding, it would not affect us in Georgia. But if you were licensed in a state like New York, which does hold Tarasoff, then it gets more complicated. But I guess with like duty to warn, you're supposed to warn the victim. So I don't know who you would tell.
Paige, can I pop over to you? And then Katie, I'm going to come to you.
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, I'm like a brand spanking new mental health provider. So I'm really happy to be here and trying to learn the standards and all this craziness. I feel like I entered the world of cuckoo-ness, but it's fine. So yeah, my understanding, I'm kind of like Hannah was saying, is that it should be protected under HIPAA, or even in the sense of protecting the mental health of the birthing person. So, if they express that I'm going to kill myself or hurt myself because of this, then my understanding, and having talked to my supervisor, it would be protected under that assumption. So that's my take.
Katie. Oh, you're on mute.
I was going to say the same thing about Tarasoff, but I also had a thought while I was sitting here was, I tell my clients this, everything you say is confidential unless you tell me about child abuse, elder abuse, if you're at imminent risk to hurt yourself or imminent risk to hurt someone else. Now, if I wouldn't report anybody, honestly, for getting an abortion. But if I think about that, really, duty to hurt yourself, what if they're hurting themselves in the process of giving themselves an abortion? Like physically hurting themselves. Duty to harm someone else, which doesn't really count because we don't have Tarasoff, and duty to harm yourself. So are they harming themselves? Like, I think I think the only way I would probably break confidentiality is if I really thought that somebody was going to physically injure themselves by performing an abortion on themselves.
So first, that's really helpful because I've just learned something. So thank you. But I would also just kind of speak to Madeline, your kind of reframing of the question. Yeah, there's actually a really real concern that mandatory reporting now applies to your client tells you that they are acting in a way that harms their fetus. Actually, this is something that's brought up very relevant to the practice. This is something that's brought up in some of the briefs in the Georgia case, Sister Song versus Kemp, that was decided yesterday. The plaintiffs there, Sister Song and Planned Parenthood, etc. One of the things that they argued was that this Georgia law, which basically not only is about abortion, but says essentially that a fetus is a person for purposes of Georgia law. Possibly, they said, this means that a pregnant person with an eating disorder is on the hook for harming a child. And someone who tells you that they are, I'm pregnant, but I don't really want to be pregnant. So I am going to engage in this activity or that activity. Kickboxing, I'm going to go do kickboxing and maybe that will do something, or I'm going to go try and abort my fetus. This could be, under Georgia law now, this could be child abuse from a technical legal perspective. And whether one does or doesn't want to report such a thing, of course, is a separate question from whether or not the state of Georgia might be able to come after someone's license for not reporting it. It's a wild possibility, and it's not clear that it's not clear from the law that this is where we're at. But the court basically said, well, we don't really know. We have to kind of see what prosecutors do and treat the cases case by case as they come along. The plaintiffs in the Georgia case were arguing basically, you can't pass a law where nobody knows what they can do or can't do. That's a constitutionally problematic law, and the 11th Circuit disturbingly said, we'll figure it out as we go along. It's not a problem. So we don't really know, but that's a real possibility.
I'd love to add something here, if that's okay.
Yes, thanks, Drew.
So obviously this is not something we have a clear answer on, unfortunately, but what this is bringing up for me is informed consent with our clients. Because when we begin counseling with someone, hopefully we're letting them know exactly what we have to report and what we don't have to report. And we're at a moment in time where we're unsure. And I think that it's important, as we get more clear information, that we are clear about that with our clients so that they know before they're confiding in us about this information, what the consequences may be.
Great point. So I know we have there's a couple more questions that I want to get to, but I wanted to just make sure there's a little more information about the law that was just passed that I want to make sure we have information about right now, and then we can keep opening it up. And I speak to this from very personal experience. So they, whether it's Shlomo or Hannah, so now that they have a personhood provision, which is implying that embryos at any stage are now considered life. That is my understanding. So I guess as someone who went through fertility treatment, who works with clients going through fertility treatment, who had extra embryos, is there someone that can explain and elaborate a little bit more about this? And is there an obligation to carry the embryo? Is it an obligation to then donate to a person? And what does that look like?
So I mean, I can try and answer that one. That one actually is one thing that the law is pretty clear about. The law specifies that a person is now a child at any stage of gestation carried in a womb. So an embryo in a lab doesn't rate. So we're lucky on that count, I guess. Yeah.
That felt helpful because I had a panic attack about that. Hannah, were you going to jump in? You're on mute. Okay.
I did not know that about the law. So Shlomo gave me an answer that I didn't anticipate. I think that there's going to be a lot of consequences. I mean, you know, I hear these things and I'm thinking like, what on earth is this going to look like in actual practice, which is like the whole question, right? Because the law is such a mess. Yeah, I don't, you know, like it's complicated because, you know, we do, you know, at the clinic, like we have one thing we do, we help people end their pregnancies. And then in L&D, in my other job, like we manage pretty much all outcomes of pregnancy. We don't do abortions, but we do, you know, miscarriage management and deliver children who are conceived through IVF or other kinds of things, you know, or children who are conceived through, you know, penis and vagina sex, like a lot of us were, you know, but it's like it is really hard to know like what the consequences will be for like what actually happens on the floor. And like, I think that like we were saying earlier, like a lot of people will be worried about the consequences for their license because your license is your livelihood, right? And so if we've seen some kind of early cases where doctors are unclear about what's okay to do and what's not. I'm not sure. There's been some conversation around ectopic pregnancies, and I thought that I read something about the Georgia law saying that, you know, you can manage an ectopic pregnancy still, but if there is a heartbeat, then I don't think that we are allowed to induce a miscarriage. And so, is in medical terms the same thing as as performing an abortion. And so I don't know, I think it will delay care. And I'm worried about it delaying care for people, both in abortion, people who are seeking abortion, like a voluntary abortion, and people who, you know, have a pregnancy that they had intended to carry to term, but there are complications.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Hannah. Okay, well, thank you for that clarification because I did not interpret it that way. And my interpretation was all embryos now had to go somewhere. So thank you for that clarification. Taylor, I'm going to pop over to you for the next question.
Yeah, this one is from Sarah Pinnell. She said, I know a lot of focus is on those seeking abortions directly, but I've heard there's also been lots of unintended consequences for those who are wanting a pregnancy but have complications. For clients who are pregnant or trying to conceive, who are now anxious about emergency care in pregnancy, for example, ectopic, premature rupture of waters before viability, should pregnant people have plans to travel out of state? And for context, she says, I've been reading tons of news of pregnant people being told to wait until they're septic, which is obviously terrifying.
I'll go ahead and try and answer. Yeah. I have seen some of these stories on social media, and I think like kind of this, like you're saying, like not catastrophizing, but having both using like what information can we use to ground ourselves and not catastrophize. There's a big, I mean, like I'm concerned for people having delayed care. I'm concerned for, like, for example, somebody presenting with a miscarriage, somebody presenting with their cervix is open and their water is broken and they're not going to be able to carry that pregnancy to term. But their pre-viability, or they're like, 20 weeks or something like that, or which is getting close to viability, but is not there yet. When somebody comes into the hospital and we think that they may deliver their pregnancy kind of anywhere between, like, I think around 23, 24 weeks is when the NICU starts having these conversations. You can sign, it is my understanding, and this is, but I'm not a NICU nurse there's, these things are pretty specialized, that people, you can sign a DNR, or the NICU like talks with you about what to expect in terms of health outcomes and what to expect, what kind of, like the same way that like when you have somebody who's in the hospital at the end of life, like you can sign a DNR, a do not resuscitate. So it's not, I don't think that there will be, at this time, I'm not expecting that there will be like, you're forced to resuscitate a child. I don't think. I think you can sign it. I mean, you can sign a DNR for somebody. I don't know, but I mean, I think that something waiting, telling people to wait until they're septic would be, I mean, pretty intense, like would be crazy, would be incredibly negligent in my opinion. And I think that there is a lot of time between the baby has died or the fetus has died and this person is septic, and now we are doing like sepsis treatment for this person. I think that is not a very likely situation to happen. It's not where, as somebody who has like more knowledge about what these, like how these cases present, that's not particularly the thing I'm as worried about, as just people like not having as many choices, people being like forced to carry pregnancies to term that they don't want to, whether it's a wanted pregnancy or an unwanted pregnancy.
Thanks, Hannah. I wanted to maybe elaborate, Taylor, before we get to the next question, just to make sure we really answer Sarah's question. And this is a little bit about action. So maybe it would be helpful, and I don't know who specifically knows that, maybe Hannah and Shlomo. So what states, if someone needed to go, what states right now can people go and get an abortion legally, and up to what weeks? Like where are we with that, and what does that look like? That would be maybe helpful for people to have this concrete knowledge.
I am just, so, I mean,
thanks, Drew.
I just like searched it, and yeah, Drew has shared something. I found a New York Times article that was updated a day ago. It doesn't appear that Georgia's on it right now though. So like, yeah, any kind of finders like these, I feel like are what I go to, because it changes so much state to state, and each state's policies are a little different.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm not clicking on it now, but what do we know what the closest state at this moment to us is? Is it Florida?
North Carolina, I think.
North Carolina. Okay. So I hope everyone can take, the links that they're sending, because they just want us to have some concrete information. So that was very helpful. Thank you. Okay, Taylor, there was another question.
Yes, we're going to go to Melissa Coates for this.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jill and panelists. Really appreciate all your work on this. My question, well, I had two, and one was about people trying to conceive. So that was helpful. Personally, that's also part of my journey right now. So I'm having, I don't know if anybody else out there is experiencing this, but I'm having a little bit of a hard time navigating my own fears around all of this and holding space for clients. It feels kind of like when COVID happened and we all were blindsided, and we're like, okay, how do we navigate this while we hold space for others? So I'm just going to throw that out there as a vulnerability point for a second to say, like, you're not alone. And I'm a sex therapist, so I work a lot around this issue. So it's, but I did get some clarification around that, and I appreciate that. So my second thing is, I just had a clarification that I want to make sure is really clear, because I'm actively a part of a court case right now where this is a thing. And in Georgia, we have a duty to protect, not a duty to warn. So I just wanted to make that really clear. Duty to protect, meaning that if anybody is in our care who is actively suicidal or saying they are going to hurt somebody else, we can't just let them go without intervention. Hospitals, mental health, psych hospitals, same too. Like they can't just let somebody go knowing that that's a thing. We do not have a duty to warn anybody that they are planning to hurt or, themselves or that. But this is something I've been very intimately ongoing with for a while now. So I just wanted to make sure that that was like really clear, which does affect this issue, that we do have a duty to protect, and that can, if it was just the duty to warn, well, you can't really warn a fetus, right? But now people are saying, yes, you can protect this child, even though, we know, regardless. That I just wanted to make that clear so that we're all on the same page about that.
I want to clarify what specifically, right?
Sure.
When you say duty to protect,
Mm-hmm.
are we talking about duty to protect our client or duty to protect the fetus?
Duty to protect. So as I understand it from what I've been personally going through, duty to protect our client,
okay,
from hurting themselves.
Yeah.
I am not entirely clear on, I don't think there's any clarity around duty to protect. Now, if it were duty to protect the person that somebody is, like, let's say it's an adult that somebody is threatening to hurt, I honestly still don't know what that would look like, because that still feels like duty to warn.
Okay.
But so there's, as I understand it, which I could be wrong, there's not a clear line there, but it just bears like repeating that there's not a clear line there.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify, because I thought I knew you were talking about client, and then the way that you switched, I just wanted to make sure that we were specifically talking about client and not fetus. Thank you so much, Melissa. It sounds like you're going through quite a doozy of a case right now. And it's nice to see you. Taylor, was there another question?
Yes, we're going to go to Sharon Frank for this one.
Great, thanks. Hi, Sharon. Good to see you.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Jill, feel better. Oh.
Thank you.
I'm getting old because I almost forgot my question. I kind of have two, and they may be ethics based. Is ethics at all involved in this new situation here in Georgia? I know that's very vague and very broad.
Is there any way for you to be a little more specific on ethics in what way? So maybe if we're talking about ethics, we can go therapeutically, or ethics legally. That way, maybe we can direct it a little more.
I'm kind of talking legally, and I'm a NICU nurse from way back when, and I know that Hannah, the nurse, is doing labor and delivery and so forth. Back in the 80s, we did have a doctor who wanted to save every single new whatever at 20, 21 weeks. And there was just no way there was going to be survival back then. Even now, I think it's very sketchy from what I know. So ethically, in that situation, is their duty to protect? Is there, I don't know all the terminology on this. That's like a big question. And does that baby, newborn, whatever, need to be resuscitated? I understand when the deliveries unfortunately took place at that time frame, our goal as stat NICU nurses and L&D was to make the baby comfortable and provide blow-by oxygen and just soothe and protect that way, but not resuscitate and save. I hope I'm making sense. So what are the ethics there? Do you have to like keep going until someone does the pronouncement dead?
I think there's like the medical ethics question, and then there's like the legal obligation question. And I don't know what will change. I mean, I don't know what the law is on, I think it would have to do with the, you know, what you're required to, I don't even know what to call that type of law.
Yeah.
You know, the law that's requiring people, you know, what law dictates like the rules around who's required to be resuscitated, who, you know, who is allowed to, because I mean, you know, who's your power of attorney and who's your legal representative to speak for what you would like to happen. Because, you know, if an adult, you know, wants us to like at the end of life of adult, if an adult cannot speak for themselves, their power of attorney speaks for them on who, what, you know, what kind of interventions they would like. And, you know, and in healthcare, we try to, you know, I know, you know, that we try to have these conversations about like, you know, what do you want to have, you know, when we anticipate somebody might need life support. We have conversations around like what kind of interventions we think that person might want. And because a baby cannot speak for themselves, the parent is the representative. And it is my guess that that would not change, that the parent can still, you know, sign a DNR or whatever, that the parent can sign a DNR, I would still think, which is, I think, the conversation that we usually have, at least on my unit, when we anticipate a delivery that is kind of on the cusp of viability. It is my understanding that NICU does a long consultation with them about what resuscitation would be like, what kind of health outcomes are likely, what quality of life would be like for that baby if it were resuscitated. I don't know what will change legally with the law, and I don't know what obligations will be as healthcare workers if those things change.
So Hannah, thank you so much for that. I want to shift a little bit because I think, you know, Sharon, I really appreciate your question and it's so important, but I think we're getting a little, not nitpicky, but down into kind of stepping outside of the zone right now and stuff we generally don't have answers to. And I think we want to backtrack to a little bit of the starting point. So I have a handful of other questions, but something I really wanted to make sure we checked in about today and the reason we really have Drew and Katie on this call specifically is, right, we're not just in a world where it's about women, right? So we have a whole group of very important people that we have, our trans folk and our non-binary folk and all of those with uteruses, right? So I think I just want to tap into that experience too, because it feels like often that part gets missed in this experience and we're solely talking about women. And I really want to bring in the conversation about really including everyone and anyone who is also struggling and navigating this experience. So I wanted to open that up to Drew and Katie a little bit more, again, why you guys are here, what this means, how we hold space for them, what it looks like, anything that you can kind of provide support and help us as clinicians, and then any clients that are here, how to help it feel a little more grounded, a little more safe. Because I think not only are they flailing in identity and in figuring out exactly who they are, we now have another whole component that they have to fight against. So kind of want to open that up. Drew, you popped off of mute, so I'm going to go right to you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up, Jill. I am a trans and gender nonconforming person, and this is something that I've thought a lot about from firsthand experience, from work with my clients. The word that keeps coming up is isolating, because the conversation has been primarily about women and about how this is a women's rights issue. And sure, it is a women's rights issue. It's also just kind of a human rights issue because it affects so many people that are not women. So there's kind of two parts here that I'm thinking about. And one is something that anybody can do, not just mental health professionals, but thinking about the language that you're using when you are talking about these issues. If you're talking about women, make sure you're including other folks too, because there are so many other people, hundreds of thousands of other people who are being impacted and are not being talked about. And it's kind of scary to be forgotten in political discourse. And so from a perspective of working with clients and from a client perspective as well, I mean, I'm in therapy myself too. I mean, one thing that I think is really important is to just acknowledge that for people who are trans, who are gender nonconforming, that probably is what a lot of them are feeling right now. The isolation, feeling forgotten, and feeling even more marginalized, because in the context of everything that's happening right now, trans folks have been taking hits left and right for a minute now legally, and this is just the cherry on top of this horrible cake. So I think also keeping in mind that context, validating folks, and thinking about the bigger picture, because it is not just this single issue at hand for a lot of folks right now.
Thanks, Drew. Katie, did you want to pop on or share anything?
There's not much more that I can say than that. I think that, holding space, I do know that a lot of my clients aren't ready to talk about it yet. So not pushing it on, holding space, but there's a point where you like hold space, but then you like get too far into it where it's like becomes awkward and they're like, okay, that's enough now, So I think that giving your clients, at least with me, giving them holding space and validation, but letting them tell me when they're ready to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I did want to see if there were any other questions specifically around this, whether it's working with clients or friends or children or anything around this that anyone wanted to bring in, or a shared experience. Just because I do feel like these folk get missed so much. And so I really want to make sure that we're opening up dialogue constantly and making it a little more normalized in our everyday vernacular, as opposed to a group over there, as so we can bring in and be much more connected around this and acknowledging what everyone else is going through. So I just wanted to open up to see if anyone else had any thoughts, any reflections, anything they wanted to share. So I'm going to give a little space for that for a moment.
Yep, let's go to Hannah Paul.
Thanks.
I am so curious as to what anyone would say or do in terms of like a client wanting to know your opinion or sharing one of their opinions that you don't agree with, because I know typically I don't talk about politics in session. Like that's kind of like a hard line of mine, but this is beyond just politics. And so I am really curious to know kind of like how anyone would handle that, or like what might be expected of us, just kind of getting some ideas.
Well, I'll start with Drew and Katie, and then we can open it up a little bit more because we do have a decent amount of therapists on the call.
So I do tend to share my politics in session. And one of the reasons for that is because I want my clients who are trans and gender expansive to know that I believe in their rights. I'm not saying that I share who I vote for or specifics like that, but I share that, I'm socially liberal, that, I believe in your rights. These are the rights that I believe in. And it's more nuanced than that. I don't want to just say I espouse my political beliefs in session, but I don't hold back if the conversation veers that way. Let's just say that. And part of that is because I do want my clients to feel like I'm on their side and that they're not just talking into a void, that their therapist is just some void that's just like going, I really want them to know that I agree with them. Now, if I had a client that if I had a client that disagreed with my beliefs, I think I would just put it into the perspective that, the way that you believe now is the way that I've believed before in my life. So I can understand where you're coming from. It might not you know, I mean, it's pretty obvious from my website that I'm not going to be anti-choice. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, you know, so, but I can also validate the client and say that, you know, in my 42 years, I have felt like you felt before.
Thanks, Katie. Drew?
I am right there with you, Katie. You know, since the vast majority of my clients are trans and hold some other marginalized identities in addition to that, these identities are unfortunately political right now. And I do, like Katie said, want my clients to know I'm right there with you. I support your rights as a person. As far as clients who are interested, whether you share their beliefs or if you have different beliefs, I think like either end of the spectrum, if you have similar values or you don't, I think there's a reason they're asking and a deeper conversation to be had. Something that I would generally ask if someone was asking, do you support this? Or you know, regardless of whether I do, okay, well, why are you curious? Why is that important to you in our work together? And I think that could lead to probably a more fruitful conversation than comparing values in session.
Thanks, Drew. I wanted to throw out one thing that I also think feels important because it happens to me a lot, is owning that we're not perfect, right? And acknowledging, you know, if we mess up a pronoun, is not dismissing it, is really acknowledging that there's a mistake, and I want to honor that, and I want to work with it, right? And doing our own work to make sure that our clients do feel safer in our experiences. And when we mess up, or we say the wrong thing, or we whatever it is, that we look at ourselves and really try to check in with that, as opposed to dismissing that, right? As if like we have to be sort of stoic and, you know, I think as Katie said, sort of like non-engaged in our session and a little more flat. So I think the more that we can show up in that way, and yes, many times I make mistakes and I say the wrong thing, and acknowledging where my mistake comes from, and then I want to work through it, and I want to make sure my clients feel safe and taken care of. And even in that experience of me saying that, I'm hoping that lends to that as well. So I just wanted to add to that piece. That was a great question. Thank you, Hannah. Taylor, was there more coming through?
We're good right now, but send them my way if you have any.
Okay. Next, I want to kind of jump a little bit to, and because this is happening, what do we think this is going to mean though for same-sex marriage, access to contraception, and things like that? Shlomo has a bit of a face.
No, I've gotten this question like so many times over the last few weeks. Hard for me to answer, or hard for me to respond to that one, because my sense is it probably doesn't mean much of anything for those rights. But then again, that's what I was saying about abortion a year and a half ago. So I don't know. From a strictly legal perspective, like the Supreme Court, the majority opinion by the Supreme Court was pretty careful to actually try and explain why this doesn't mean anything for those other rights. The distinction it drew is between exercises of privacy and liberty that impact others, and states that have banned abortion view fetuses as others, and exercises of liberty that don't impact others in a non-consensual way. So contraception, same-sex marriage, etc., are issues that the court tried to make clear are exercises of privacy and autonomy and liberty that don't impact anyone else other than by their consent. Not true, the court said, when it comes to abortion, at least for those states who have decided that they think a fetus is a person. That does impact another person without their consent, and therefore it can get regulated, and you don't have a right to act with impunity, the court said, to do whatever you want, just like I have a right to swing my fist around until it meets your face. I don't have a right to swing my fist where your face is because it impacts someone else. The court said you don't have a constitutional right to exercise your liberties to have an abortion because the state of Georgia or the state of Texas thinks that it impacts another person, and they're allowed to think that a fetus is a person. So there's that. A lot was made right after the decision came out about Justice Clarence Thomas's opinion, where he says, well, maybe we should start thinking again about same-sex marriage, and we should start thinking again about contraception. And the truth is that Justice Thomas has been saying the same exact thing for 30 years. No one has ever listened to anything Justice Thomas has ever said. Not to be like completely flippant about it, but that's kind of true. So, could we imagine the court kind of willfully saying, oh yeah, we got abortion, now we're going after same-sex marriage, and then we're going after contraception? We could imagine it, and any good lawyer can come up with the good arguments of why the language in the Dobbs decision doesn't really preclude saying that there's no right to same-sex marriage, etc. But it doesn't seem like the court is there now, or likely to be there in the relatively near future. I could imagine a world in 10 years from now, or 7 or 10 years from now, maybe, where that was the case. But I think it's unlikely, and it's certainly not in the very near future, I think.
Okay. I have different thoughts, not different thoughts, but again, even the fact that it's even in the realm of a conversation is already kind of fuels fire in some ways, but we're going to take from this legal standpoint at this moment that it is not on the docket, it's not upcoming, and we're going to hold to that rather than catastrophizing any situation in this moment.
We do have a question.
Great, thank you, Taylor.
Yeah, so we're going to go to Erin Simone for this.
Great. Here she is.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, Erin. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Jill. Thank you so much for putting this together.
Absolutely.
I don't know if this is the best category for my question, but it felt relevant, and my heart is racing. So it's kind of it feels like a heavier question, but we haven't quite touched on it yet. So as we know in society, like, miscarriages are already traumatic and unpleasant and emotional. How is all of this going to affect those? Like, catastrophizing worst case scenario in a very creative imagination is like, am I going to have to, if someone who goes through, who experiences a miscarriage, are they going to have to prove that it wasn't self-induced? I think that's the best way to word that question. And I guess, like, my anxiety right now is just like imagining that fear that, like, I'm going through this like terrible experience and now I have to prove that I didn't break the law, like this, you know what I mean? I think I've said enough, but I just wanted to bring that question into the room, and it felt like kind of relevant with the contraceptive. I don't know what category to put it in, but I just needed to name it because it just feels really, really heavy this week.
Thank you so much for bringing that in. I think it's a really important question. I'm going to start with Hannah, and then maybe we'll pop over to Shlomo, but I don't know, Hannah, if you had any thoughts about that.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think that's been I think that has been in my thoughts and been in other people's thoughts for sure. And even though it's really hard to bring up sometimes. I think that part of my, I'm going to backtrack for a second and think about, so I was thinking about this when we're talking about how we can center and include and not make trans people feel like they're like an extra group outside of the conversation around abortion. And so I was thinking about how we have to bring in like our approach and our understanding of abortion, like what it means to move from just like abortion rights and being pro-choice to reproductive autonomy, to reproductive justice, which is like a particular framework of approach to understanding reproductive autonomy that came out of Black women organizing, well, like Sister Song is a great example of a reproductive justice organization, because reproductive justice is not just about, is about the right to abortion, but is also about the right to have safe families, and is also about the right to exercise reproductive autonomy for queer families and for queer people and over queer bodies. And that when we understand that what is happening right now as a wider part of that system of oppression, like a system of oppression that isn't just about disliking women, but is about like attacks on reproductive autonomy, then we can like better understand attacks on trans folks. Some of this concern about gay marriage, which I'm concerned about too as a queer woman. And to come back to your question, I think that I don't think that this will happen across the board. I think that I think that it would be unrealistically optimistic for me to say that I don't think that anybody will not experience that. But I bring up what I brought up because I think that we have to, like, all of this like conversation around like who's going to be criminalized, who's going to be policed, and who's going to be like affected by lack of access, who's going to be like, it's primarily going to be poor people in the South. It is also primarily going to be Black people and Black women and women of color and people of color. And I think some of my most intense worries are around how those communities are going to be affected by these decisions, because we've seen how like it's like the same concept of understanding like police violence and criminalization, how those things apply to like reproductive autonomy. We've seen examples of people being persecuted for drug use during pregnancy, even before Roe v. Wade was overturned. There's been a pretty violent history of that in obstetrics, particularly in the South, but in the country as well. And so I don't think that is likely to happen most of the time, or as a, but kind of like Shlomo was saying, like, you know, you can have people who are, you can, if you get somebody who is just, you know, it depends on not even like people like prosecutors and like who your healthcare providers are. And it, like, you can get, I mean, frankly, like crazies who, like people who just, you know, they decide that that's the thing that they're gonna go for. You know, you get people who can do things that, or who have like a political conviction or are trying to carry out, I don't know, so I'm having a hard time finding my words. I don't think that it'll happen. I don't think that it is likely to happen, but I think that if it does happen, the people who will be criminalized are going to be the communities that we are going to be poor people. And in the South, it'll be Black people and people of color as well.
Or less privileged.
Yeah.
I think, and Erin, I just wanted to add one more thing to when you shared that, again, I think those that struggle with miscarriages, it's another extremely isolating, lonely experience. And many people don't talk about it. And so I think that's just another component that we're adding to, is really trying to bring in as many people's experiences that go on, as opposed to having isolated groups. And so I could tell, you know, obviously you bringing that in, you know, how much it holds for you. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I do think that that's another component, is those that even struggle with miscarriage, it's already a loss, it's already a pain. And then the fear all of a sudden that someone's going to come and say something or do something, you know, after you've already experienced such a loss, adds so much emotional turmoil already in that moment. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Can I share something as someone who's actually had a conversation with a doctor about this topic?
Hey, Sarah, glad you're here.
So as someone who, disclosure, has had miscarriages myself, And so therefore I've actually had a conversation. My miscarriages were prior to obviously all of this being, but that has been a concern. I mean, miscarriages have been a concern for me personally. So I've actually talked to doctors, not necessarily about the prosecution piece per se, but, you know, about care for miscarriages, things for that, given the anticipation of this law coming in. But one thing that did come up in that conversation has been that, again, especially for those of us who have anxiety around miscarriage, things like that, again, which I think is part of this, is, and also how do we care for clients who have this anxiety? Because again, that's another anxiety of like, yes, is it, as I think Shlomo said earlier, is like, is it low risk? Yes. Again, is it most likely going to hit people who are more marginalized? Yes. It's also terrifying when obviously you're going through it. And so one thing that came up is if you want to be abundance of caution, is to email your doctor about any symptoms you were to have, is to say, I am having bleeding, this has started. You will create a record. If you wanted to have an abundance of caution, that record would be in place. It is horrible that we have to consider thinking about making a record, but if that would also ease someone's anxiety, to know that there would be that record there, I think that's more where this comes in to help. How do we help ease people's anxieties? That's a lot of the work I've been talking to clients about too, is like, what can they do also to have preparations so that then that I think as much as anything can ease people's anxieties. And so I think in terms of miscarriage or people who are at risk for that, you know, who are concerned, I think that is something that you can share with people, or that is an option. Again, it's horrible that we have to even consider it, but that is a way to kind of self-protect.
Thanks, Sarah. So Taylor, any more questions down the pipeline?
Madeline had her hand raised, but she put it down. Is there anything you wanted to bring in, Madeline?
Oh, I was just going to reiterate some of what I think Jill said, but also like, I think I take it both from like being a therapist and being somebody that also went through miscarriage, is like, I always start with the person talking about their experience of like justice and safety, and then maybe connect it to larger issues. But in that moment, yet to focus clinically on their, you know, experience of it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Madeline. So first, I just want to thank everyone. There's so many layers to this, right? That we have like actual political and legal points, and then we have all the other emotions that go under it. And again, I'm the emotions person, and so all of that we hold, and not having answers and feeling confused. And so I just really appreciate everyone showing up and bringing these to the forefront. And as I said, I have felt very helpless, and I recognize I'm not someone who's going to hand out postcards and go door to door, but I want to find ways that we can come together as a community and support each other and get answers and not catastrophize. So I'm so grateful for all of you to just have been here tonight. What I want to do just before we go is two things. Is one, I'd love each of the panelists, if you could say one thing about what do you want everyone to maybe take from tonight? Maybe not everyone, but what would be your one message or one piece of whatever that you would like to put out there? I've been calling on people, but that's actually not my jam. So I'm going to just, whoever wanted to pop off of mute, I want to let you do that. I lied. I'll do it. And I guess that's my job as the moderator, but I was going more therapeutic. Hannah, what would be one thing that you would really want to make sure that people took away from tonight?
You know, I feel like it's really hard to come up with one thing to say about all of this, because it's like, I feel like I have a lot of experience with abortion care and like abortion advocacy, and I don't know what to think about this sometimes. I mean, I'm obviously very upset, and it makes me angry, but I don't know what's happening. I don't feel like I know what's happening right now. I think what grounds me when I think about all of this, and how I think that getting to just be with people, like, you know, and this is something that is probably helpful if you're a therapist. I mean, I'm not a therapist, I don't know. But like when I'm with a patient, like it is really grounding for me to be like, there's so much else going on that is like an absolute shit show, but I'm here with this patient and I can like do a lot in this one interaction to support this person and help this person get the absolutely best reproductive care that I can give them. I think that that is something that really grounds me. And I think almost everybody I work with, even in labor and delivery, which I think people tend to think people who work in labor and delivery and NICU would be kind of maybe pro-life or anti-abortion. Everybody I work with is scared and frustrated, and because we want to be able to provide the best care for our patients. And certainly everybody I work with in abortion care is hella frustrated and angry and ready to take some big action to see what we can do to still help Georgians access abortion, still help people get the care that they need. That makes me feel very hopeful. It makes me feel connected with people who are just so smart and like empowering and brilliant. And knowing that like there are so many good people that are doing this work that are like here, and that like even if I'm angry and frustrated about it, I am not the only person who's angry and frustrated. And I feel like I can work with the people I'm in community with to get people care.
Amazing. Thanks, Hannah. Shlomo.
So I think I would say I would make 2 points. One point is the recurring theme that we've seen is kind of trying to figure out this balance between not catastrophizing and actually being grounded here and in the realities of kind of what the risks are and what they aren't. At the same time, the reality of the legal risks doesn't really necessarily matter for a lot of people. Because the anxieties and the fears and the anger and all of that kind of stuff is still going to be there. And I can tell you the realities of the legal risks from today until tomorrow. And it doesn't necessarily matter all that much in the here and now. So, you know, trying to kind of, I think, you know, walk away with a balanced appreciation that there's a lot of very real restriction that's following on the you know, overturning of Roe and the adoption of these new abortion restrictions. There's a lot that's happening, and at the same time, a lot of the things that you might hear are happening, or a lot of the things that you might hear this means or doesn't mean may not actually be accurate. So I think that that's kind of an important point, especially because there's so much uncertainty around a lot of this. The second thing I would say is it's also important to, I think, appreciate that this ride is not yet over. The dust on this stuff is going to be settling for months and years going ahead. We're in a situation now where laws that were never written to actually be policy are now suddenly real laws. These abortion laws that have been passed in recent years and over the last 30, 40 years have been written as virtue signaling by conservative politicians, have been written to create challenges to Roe versus Wade in order to have laws that people would then challenge in the courts, so the courts have an opportunity to overturn Roe versus Wade. These weren't actually, for the most part, these aren't laws that were written by legislators with an eye towards affecting actual policy. And even very staunchly conservative pro-life politicians, the lawmakers, generally are going to be looking at a lot of these laws and what they do that no one ever expected them to do, and they're going to start tweaking, right? The laws that are doing, right, the notion that, well, the heartbeat bill means that all the therapists in the room are now on the hook for mandatory reporting when someone says when a client says they're pregnant and doing heroin. And if you don't report this now, you could lose your license. There are almost no, there are some nutcases that are sort of, yeah, that's a great rule. But the vast majority of even conservative lawmakers are like, that's a really stupid rule. It doesn't actually produce any good policy. We need to fix this. We need to fix that. So I suspect that over the next couple of years, you're going to see tweaks like that being made. Because again, this is a law that everyone sort of wrote not to be a real law. So now that it's a real law, it's going to get trimmed and adapted and changed here and there. So the dust is not done on this stuff. So there's lots of opportunity there for it to kind of advocate and work towards making sure, especially through professional communities, like legislators don't know that this is really bad stuff unless like professional communities are letting them know and lobbying. And this is what this law does to my therapy practice. Like, so there's lots of opportunity for that. And I would encourage people who like see the on the ground effects of this stuff to do some, to you know, kind of voice that and express that.
Thank you so much, Shlomo, and for giving us really concrete legal information. I think that feels so important right now. I'm gonna pop over to Katie.
Yeah, so obviously, you know, I'm a gender specialist, so I want people to know and reiterate that this doesn't just affect, you know, cisgender women. It affects people of all gender identities. I also want everyone to know, I want everybody to know to like look around the room. And I noticed that there were at some point there were like almost 40 people in this meeting tonight. And it's a Tuesday night. No, God, what day is it? It's a Thursday night. It's a Thursday night. We're getting towards 9 o'clock. So, you know, I'm not normally up on Zoom this late. So there's a lot of people that are really, really impacted, first of all, but there's a lot of people that are passionate about this. And I have lost faith in the power of, I've lost some faith in the power of, you know, my voice in all of this, but I still think that there are a lot of reasons to, there's a lot of reasons to vote. There's a lot of reasons to get to the polls. There's a lot of reasons to gather your friends. And that, you know, there's 40 people on this call. Imagine how many people actually care about this right now. It's the people, you know, the people in power are few and the people are the people and they are many. And that is what we need to focus on.
Thank you, Katie. Really appreciate that. Great points. Andrew.
All right, this has been so good. I hope what I have to say is not going to be sort of a cliche therapist response, but this has been what I've been thinking about most and kind of what I touched on earlier. I do try to engage in advocacy and activism as much as I can, even outside my work as a therapist. And that can lead to burnout very quickly. And this is an issue that is sort of all consuming for a lot of folks and extremely dysregulating. And so what I hope everyone here can take away is give yourself the opportunity to give yourself permission to prioritize what you need first, so that you can be an advocate, so that you can be an activist, so that you can do whatever it is that you're out there doing in the world to support people. And just like an example, I have barely been on social media. I have barely read any news since the end of June, and it has been extremely helpful for my mental health and the work that I've been able to do. It's definitely increased my capacity for all that. So that's what I would want to end on here.
Thank you, Drew. Agreed. So just before we head out, I want whoever of the panelists, if you want, I know maybe you did at the beginning, but we've had a lot of stuff go through the chat. If you could put your contact, if you feel comfortable to do so, and any other, I know we've mentioned Sister Song, and I know we've mentioned women's feminist health, and I know there is Planned Parenthood. After speaking with Hannah, Planned Parenthood is wonderful, but we also want to make sure we go really local. So if there are any other specific local organizations, and I know if you scroll through, I mean, looking at women's feminist health, they have a lot of opportunities and a lot of programming. So really paying attention to that. If you wanted to follow up after with anyone specifically, feel free to do so. I did want to say after this, if you wanted either recording or you wanted to follow up, you're going to go to Taylor, not to Jill. So Taylor's going to put her email address in there as well, or even if you, I know a lot of people have reached out. So if you want to just send them Taylor's information so that she can send the recording, that's fine. I'm going to try to eliminate, as protective of myself, of all the emails coming in. And I guess the last thing I wanted to throw out there is at one point I think we still do. We have 3 cisgender men on the call. I think we want to make sure that we're involving our male counterparts and really involving in this. I think that feels really important. I'm really grateful for those men that showed up, but I also think, right, this is not a women's issue. This is not a trans issue. This is not a non-binary issue. This is a human issue. And so I really want to make sure that, and I love that we have so many people on the call, but I just want to throw that out there. I feel like that's a place we really want to make sure we're also bringing people in. Thank you so much for everyone that came tonight. I'm so grateful. And I think considering we were on Zoom, it went really, really well. So my anxiety has calmed down because I really wanted to make sure it felt connected in community. And thank you for all those that shared and were willing to open up. I'm so grateful for that. If anyone needs any other random questions, again, feel free to email me. We'll do our best to try to do something as Paige asked. We can try to look down the line and do something like this again, just to bring everyone together. So thank you everyone so much. If my team and the panel could stay on for just a minute, but everyone else have a wonderful night. Thank you so much.